Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special event co-hosted by the Medicines Patent Pool and Unitaid. My name is Lovna, and together with Cherise, we will be facilitating today's session. We are in the company of an amazing lineup of experts, and thanks for being here, and stay tuned because we have a couple of announcements to make today. So we wanted to talk today about long-acting technologies. The current daily oral treatment and prevention regimens are very efficient and essential components of the HIV fight toolbox. However, the need to take pills can be challenging in some cases and may not fit into everyone's lives. Limited adherence to medication poses a barrier to effective prevention of HIV and to viral suppression, resulting in sustained transmission of the virus. To address this challenge, researchers have been developing optimized formulations requiring less frequent administrations. These long-acting formulations promise simplified dosing, less stigma, less mental burden to users, patients, and caregivers, and therefore improve therapeutic outcomes and potentially optimization of public health resources. While these options are being developed, we need to think about ways to expand and promote equitable and affordable access to them. Today, we are going to focus on access because for too many, health is inaccessible, unaffordable, or altogether unavailable. The MPP model contributes to making sustainable access to effective and affordable therapeutic administered in resource-limited context a reality, including through voluntary licensing. The objective of today's discussion is to identify strategies and key elements to consider how to foster access to long-acting formulation along with the product development pipeline. And we are pleased to have a panel of experts with us. We are going to share their insights and expertise. So please feel free to send over questions and comments through the chat and the Q&A. So as I told you, we have a couple of announcements to make before moving to the panel discussion. The first one is that we are very excited to announce that MPP has signed a new license agreement for a long-acting injectable drug combination technology for HIV treatment and/or prevention with the University of Washington in the context of a Unitaid-funded project. This license agreement is for a product enabled by UW's proprietary long-acting platform to formulate TLD into an all-in-one subcutaneous injection to be administered monthly or less frequently to adults living with HIV to treat their viral infection. So this candidate product is currently ongoing preclinical studies, with clinical studies tentatively scheduled for 2024. If this long-acting formulation of TLD is proven to be safe, effective, and acceptable, its successful development and commercialization in close collaboration with key stakeholders throughout the value chain may help people living with HIV achieve virus suppression without the need of daily oral pills. This license agreement covers all middle-income countries and is royalty-free in both public and private markets. This license has the potential to demonstrate the relevance of addressing access and affordability at upstream points of development in a transparent manner with public health-oriented terms and conditions. So the second announcement is the launching of a remarkable and much needed landscape report on novel technologies for the prevention of HIV, STIs, and unwanted pregnancy. And Dr. Bethany Young-Holt will tell us about it in a video.
Greetings, and thank you very much to Cherise Scott of Unitaid and Lovna Gayeb of the MPP for the opportunity to announce the release of our brand new landscape report entitled Multi-Purpose Prevention Technologies, MPTs, Technology Landscape and Potential for Low and Middle Income Countries. This was prepared by the Initiative for Multi-Purpose Prevention Technologies, or the IMPT, for Unitaid and the Children's Investment Fund Foundation. My name is Bethany Young-Holt, and I am the founder and executive director for CAMI Health, a global reproductive health program based at the Public Health Institute in California in the US. Since 2009, CAMI Health has served as a secretariat for the IMPT, a global learning network that aims to advance MPTs. An array of MPTs are in development for the prevention of 2 or more adverse sexual and reproductive health outcomes, unintended pregnancies, HIV, and other sexually transmitted infections or STIs. External and internal condoms, also referred to as male and female condoms, are currently the only approved method that provides simultaneous protection against these interlinked risks. While a number of MPTs in development are long-acting, others are short-acting, including on-demand products. New and more diverse types of MPTs can revolutionize the health of adolescent girls and young women and other priority populations, as long as we ensure that they are accessible, affordable, and fit for purpose to meet their diverse needs and preferences. This comprehensive report, the first of its kind to focus on MPTs, highlights the potential of these innovative tools to accelerate progress to meet sexual and reproductive health targets, especially in low and middle income countries where MPTs have the potential to be the most impactful. It also outlines critical gaps that need to be addressed for this potential to be realized. Building on this momentum and realizing the game-changing potential of MPTs will require a coordinated effort from HIV, STI, and contraceptive stakeholders around the world. On that note, we invite you to download your copy of the report today and look forward to engaging with you to help ensure the most promising MPT candidates reach end users. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Dr. Bethany Young-Holt, and congratulations on this report to everyone. I would like now to pass the microphone to Cherise to introduce our panelists and the panel discussion.
Hello, everyone. We're very excited today to be here. And we have a really great panel discussion ahead of us. We have 4 amazing panelists. Professor Quarraisha, Abdool, Karim, an Associate Scientific Director of CAPRISA, and Professor of Clinical Epidemiology also in Columbia University. And then we have Mr. Yves Kugbe, from a community representative from the member of the Long-Acting Technologies Community Advisory Board of the Longevity Project, and Dr. Kumarasamy, Director of the Infectious Disease Medical Center and the Chennai Antiviral Research and Treatment Clinical Research Site, and Dr. Siobhan Crowley, head of the HIV at the Global Fund. So we're very excited. So we'll start with Professor Quarraisha, if you would, who will talk about the key considerations for enhancing access to long-acting technologies.
Thank you very much, Cherise, for that warm introduction, and also to thank you and the organizers for the opportunity to make a few comments on key considerations for introducing long-acting technologies. And I wanted to start off by congratulating UnitAid and its partners for the 2 announcements that are made, which are so key and pivotal in terms of this landscape, MPT landscape report, and also the award to the University of Washington for the production of long-acting. Both are going to be critically important as we move forward, and the important first steps. But as we gather here in Durban in 2020, and it also reminds us that we're living in a world not just with HIV and TB and other epidemics, but also COVID-19, and how COVID-19 has disrupted our lives. But there are also important lessons from COVID-19 as we get back on track with dealing with multiple epidemics and pandemics, including HIV. I wanted to first start by paying tribute to Zina Stein. Some of you may be aware that she passed away a few weeks ago at the age of 99. But many of us working in this space will recall a pivotal publication she did in 1990 in the American Journal of Public Health, calling for women-initiated technologies. And way back in 1990, almost 10 years after the first AIDS cases were described, and where there was very little focus on women and women's needs, Sina published this paper. And what this paper highlighted was the importance of multi-purpose technologies, that women who were acquiring HIV infection sexually had other needs, including fertility control needs, including treatment for STIs, and also for HIV prevention. And pretty much the first decade that followed, between 1990 and about 2003, 2004, a lot of our focus were on topical agents that could be used to address multiple needs. And I think as we moved along with our products, we learned that, that there are challenges to these. And as we moved to very specific products that were more antiretroviral based and addressing HIV infection, we got a good sense of what works, what doesn't work. And it gives you some insights into the challenges that face us. Today, as we gather, we know a lot more about women's health, and we know that HIV acquisition is influenced by biology as much as it is by behavior and context. And critically important is that when we're dealing with HIV prevention, particularly for adolescent girls and young women in sub-Saharan Africa, we have to keep reminding ourselves what we're dealing with is a social challenge. A social challenge that's rooted very much in gender power dynamics, and that the importance of science is about enhancing and increasing and expanding options that may fit women's lives at different points in time. But I also want to go back to an important consideration and an important lesson from COVID-19 is that while we may have political leadership and while we may have the public health measures, translating that into effectiveness, into, in the case, for example, vaccines, into the arms of people requires more. And that very early engagement with community is critically important. And it's not about working on communities, nor is it about for communities, but it is about with communities. And I want to focus on two communities that we need to pay attention to if you're going to take these promising options and translate them into choices. And that's the community of beneficiaries and the community of providers. And I think quite often we think about the users and the providers very early on in the process and then go away and do what we want and then try and pick up again. And what we've learned with oral PrEP. So before I go into oral PrEP, just to highlight that adolescent girls and young women account for 25% of new infections in sub-Saharan Africa, and particularly in Eastern and Sub-Saharan Africa, about 60% of global infections are here. And 65% of the population is under the age of 35. So preventing infection in young women is critically important to reap the demographic dividends on the continent in terms of development, etc. But they're not a homogeneous group. Adolescent girls and young women at risk of getting infected are related to age disparate relationships, the recency of those relationships, but further biology, particularly genital health, impacts their risk as well. And so when we think about genital health, there are many factors that influence that, including contraceptive choice, including bacterial vaginosis, and sexually transmitted infections, and a whole range of other things that time limits me to go into. But that we also have infected users and uninfected users. And to give you a glimpse of this, by age 25, in many of the hyper-endemic epidemic settings, every other woman is infected with HIV. By age 30, in some communities, it can be up to 70% of women infected with HIV. And the point I'm making in this cautionary note is that when we introduced implants as a contraceptive option in South Africa a few years ago, we did not take this distinction into account. And so we had to withdraw the implants very quickly because there were antagonistic interactions between the implant and the particular combination of ARV drugs that were being used for treatment. That led to a knock-on effect where many uninfected women started to present at health facilities to remove their implants. So just to think about this group is heterogeneous. They are infected, uninfected, many factors influencing this as we think about this long pipeline. Secondly, in terms of providers, they're important gatekeepers. And it's important to engage providers, particularly at primary healthcare centers, where we've been trying to inculcate a notion of sexual reproductive health services as new technologies are being developed. How do we engage them? How do we involve them? And what do we need to be doing very, very early on in the process? Because they become the biggest amplifiers of any products that we have, and introduce it and support it and ensure its success. And lastly, I wanted to end with capacity building. And the capacity building is so critically important. Another lesson from COVID-19, that we can't have these places in different parts of the world having monopoly in terms of manufacturing and production and have supply chain interruptions. And so as we learn to live with SARS-CoV-2, our responses to other challenges we face, addressing essential services for women and others at risk and need, and addressing all of those, is we have to look at the regulatory space, we have to look at manufacturing, and we need to start now, if already, with building the capacity in those different levels, so that we have, when we have products, we can roll that out as rapidly as possible and realize the goal of giving women choices that are safe, that are appropriate for particular times in their lives. Thank you very much for this opportunity to make these comments.
Thank you, Professor Quarraisha. So now we'll move quickly to Yves, who will give us reflections from the first Global Community Advisory Board focused on long-acting technologies.
Thank you. So I'm very glad to be here and also to share with you some of our reflection from a community perspective on this topic. And I'm pretty glad that the previous intervention also highlights the involvement of communities. And talking about that, when you talk about communities' implication, involvement in the process, in development of products, one of the key entry was, some of the principles that was set, the Denver principles that was set during the AIDS conference in 1983. Which highlight that a community highlight the right of community to be involved in scientific research, but also this leads to to the creation of community advisory board on this process, and community advisory board have this role to promote norms and standards that advance need-driven research, but also review the form. Review and inform also the design and of clinical trial to ensure that there's a good participatory practices with the affected community as well. And also part of the role of a community advisory board is to assist and provide country-specific data as well by being involved in the process, and but also strategically to accelerate, advocate for affordable access to long-acting technologies as well. But what we need to highlight also when you talk about community participation in this process, we need to focus that the community advisory board doesn't focus on health system barriers and its determinant as well. So, and then the next slide will show us for the long-acting technologies, the community advisory board that was set, how this was set in place, and how we as community, we do engage within this space. I would like to highlight that this long-acting technology community advisory board is part of the United Funded Longevity Project as well. And the aim of this project is to develop novel and long-acting therapeutic HCV cure and prevention for malaria and latent TB infection as well, and this from 2021 to 2024. And the TAG is the one coordinating the community engagement aspect on the project, but also developing treatment literacy material about long-acting technologies as well. And this to ensure that the broader community engagement participation is relevant and is taken account. There were a recruitment of members that community members that can be part of this space and also share their reflection and also engage with the process. And this call was done during the period of May to July 2021, and we got quite a few interesting expertise all across the continent, but and also at the global level. But we still need some other member to join from some countries, especially those people based in Asia and so in MENA region as well. So here is also a reminder that if you will be willing to join this community advisory board, we still have some place for you, so do not hesitate. The link is there, www.helpcoalition.org, and then it's set. But also within our LATCAB, what we do concretely is to review the states and the treatment research, and also contribute to the research protocols and engage in research development as well. And by then we also share reflection, and because we are from a community perspective, a community background, despite the expertise that we may have as community experts, we still have some lack in terms of scientific development of product and other issues related to the process of developing the product, especially when it comes to new technologies. So also LATCAB is a space that where we can also build capacities, build skills on those thematic also. And also from that end, community experts will be able to share their perspective and their opinion on the process as well. Let me quickly move to the next slide to talk a little about the advantages that come with this involvement in this kind of spaces. For us community and also more focusedly when it comes to long-acting technologies, the way the technology is developed, it's the aim of this is bringing more freedom, when we talk about daily peace-taking matter, and because this technology also remove these daily peers matters, but also it's address again the main barrier that are linked to the treatment adherence, namely when pill fatigue and stigma that is also linked to the medication taken. Also, it's also addressed some of the systematic barriers that women cisgenders face when it's come to the PrEP interventions. And this was also founded in a research that was conducted sometime before this symposium. And for instance, longer-acting injectable antiretroviral has been dramatically reduced the dosing days from 316 days per year to 12 days per year. So this also infers this advantage to reduce the fatigue and also to reduce the barrier to adherence as well. And there is also other benefits from this technology and innovation, such as also the removal of barrier related to PrEP among cisgender women, like I said. But we do also have some cons that goes with that, and one of them is how do we manage the side effect, because as community we are more affected about the side effect of the product, And because due to the formulation of these new technologies, and because they still, release this continuously active ingredient in the bloodstream. Okay, let me just move quickly to the next slides and go to the recommendation. One of the recommendations from the community perspective is, also to negotiate the inclusion of a higher burden and upper and middle income countries in the voluntary licenses, and also to ensure that multiple generic suppliers in countries under voluntary licenses are also taken into account, especially when you talk about pricing and how do we involve also communities in the consideration of their need at our stage of the product development as well. I think I'm going to just stop here to give the floor to the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So Dr. Kumarasamy, please, you can start. Thank you.
Greetings from Chennai, from Southern India. So first, at the outset, I'd like to thank the ICAS organizers, United, MPP, and Quarraisha, and all the other organizers of this satellite for inviting me to say a few words about the need for these new drugs and long-acting injectables to be studied in all population, particularly in pregnant women, as well as in children. Me being an infectious disease physician, taking care of a very large number of people living with HIV here in Chennai, India, and also a researcher and a clinical trialist involved in clinical trials with ACTG, HPTN, and several other network and our own clinical trials. And also as a guideline maker, particularly serving on the WHO Guidelines Committee and our National Treatment Guidelines Committee, we always struggle to find data of these newer drugs and as well as some of those newer long-acting coming up, particularly in pregnant women as well as in children, to recommend anything. So again, having said that, why we don't see that these data are lacuna is because these newer medications are not studied in this population. So hence, we are not able to make any particular recommendation using these medications. And because of that, what's happening is this very critical population, they are left out with the benefits of some of those newer molecules in that management as well as prevention of HIV, which are much superior as compared to the earlier ones. They've got less adverse effects and easy to use. These are all left alone in this particular population because of the lack of data available. Now, why this happens? Because all these years, when any clinical trials have been done using these newer molecules, very rarely pregnant women and children are included in the earlier phase 1, phase 2, and phase 2A and 2B clinical trials. Rarely they are being included in phase 3, and most of the time the data what we get is all from the phase 4 studies where they have been recommended, people use it, or women use it, then they become pregnant, you collect all the registry data, and based on that, several recommendations all happening. So I think to fill this lacuna on the data so that these good products can be used in these population, I think this is time that these studies should be even conducted in a earlier completion of non-clinical studies in these populations are very important, particularly in women becoming pregnant. They should be included in the clinical trials. There are several discussions happen. In fact, we had a few months back experts from clinicians and clinical trialists, community guideline makers, advocacy makers all met together, and we discussed, reviewed data, and make some recommendations. And some of those which came up from that particular recommendation is, I think this is time that to involve women of childbearing potential affected by HIV, from the identification of research questions through the study design, recruitment, contact, and the dissemination of results. Now they have been left out, and this population is completely left out, for this recommendation. And also to perform non-clinical development and reproductive toxicology studies, which are something very much not been available. And because of that, several such recommendations are not being done on this population. And very importantly, women who become pregnant, especially in pre-licensure trials, should be given the option to make an informed choice whether they can stay on one of those study drugs. Now, currently, me being from experience being a clinical trial is, there will be a clause, they will be excluded and they will be moved to the standard of care. I think this is time that where they should be given a choice whether they want to stay on these drugs and get the benefit and get some data out of that, or they need to be moved to the other standard of care. And also enroll pregnant women in specific studies, particularly as we all know that in pregnancy and in lactation, as well as in children, the PK of these drugs varies. So this is time to determine these studies very early so that when we have this recommendation, all this data will be available to do this appropriately. And also to investigate all the adverse pregnancy and birth outcomes through dedicated pregnancy safety studies for all new priority HIV agents. I think this is very, very important. Currently, what's happening is they have been prescribed or women become pregnant while on certain drugs, then they have been captured. And also, this is time to expand our active surveillance of drug safety in pregnancy. Now, we have such a wonderful surveillance program in Botswana. The SEPAMA study group keep feeding us data on various usage of starting from efavirenz now to dolutegravir. I think this is time that we need to expand such active surveillance across the world, particularly lower and middle income countries, so that we'll have this type of data from all populations, not from one race. I think that's this. So again, having said this, this is time to involve women very early in the studies, starting from phase 1, phase 2A, and phase 2B. Again, having said all those, there are a lot of players have been involved, not just the researchers alone. We have funders. Whenever we propose any studies using certain population, funders sometimes shy away from that. It's time to sensitize them that we need data from such population. And also industry, they want to do quick trials, generate some quicker data to get their approvals. And many times all the vulnerable population, they like to leave it out so that because that takes time to get all the ethical issues and recruiting all population. It's time that to sensitize them, involve them into this area so that they'll be very supportive of this. And very importantly, regulators. Many times regulators getting them all this approval is such a difficult thing. It's time to involve them from very early on. How important to involve this population to generate the data so that this data will be useful in public health setting. Again, from our own experience of getting certain clinical trials approved by our own ethics committees, this time that educating the ethics committee members about some of those need for such studies are important. So it's something where they need to be sensitized, they should be given proper information and keep involve them in some of those meetings and programs about these newer medication so that we get support, appropriate ethical reviews from those committees. And of course, involving
Kumarasamy, we have to move forward. Sorry, go ahead.
Sure. Involving civil societies, which we just heard from our colleague a little earlier, and the community-based organizations. So I think these are some of the things we need to do that. And now very recently, WHO has released a guideline, which some of you have seen that on approaches to enhance these newer medications in pregnant women, children. I think that will be a very important resource for us to adapt this. At this time, I'll stop here and probably throw upon questions at the later. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you. So thank you so much. So we'll move to Dr. Siobhan.
Morning, afternoon, evening, and thanks very much for organising an important panel and for being with our distinguished panelists. I want to, I mean, my colleagues have said much of the important things. I want to take you on a journey as if you're at the Global Fund. I'm just going to share a slide with you which shows where we are with the PrEP demands in this implementation period. So as you can see from this, we have a massive increase in the amount of PrEP being supplied through the Global Fund, but it's still a really small proportion of what we actually provide. So I'm going to stop showing that and I'm going to take you on the journey behind getting to that. And obviously, for us to have an order, as it were, by a country, placed by a country, it needs to be in a grant. Grants are in a 3-year cycle. So this NFM3 period, the cycle was largely worked on the year before last. Grants were mostly signed last year and began last year, and they run for 3 years. So for us to have PrEP or any new agent to be included in a global funding request, there's a whole set of things that need to come behind it. Firstly, we have to list it on our catalogue, which is actually quite easy, because as long as there's a stringent regulatory authority recommending it, or it's and or WHO pre-qualified, we can put it there. It's no big deal. If it isn't, it's a bit of a problem for us to put it there, and there's a whole process we have to go through. In order to get on the books, there needs to be country demand. They need to include it in their budget. They need to include it as part of the budget that is approved and selected, but that goes through a country coordination mechanism, selection process, and a submission. And what needs to happen before that? Well, the guideline in the country, the technical working group in the country, Kumarasamy said he sits in the Indian one, he sits in the that has to have met. They have to have agreed to those guidelines, that which groups of people are eligible, what criteria for eligibility, both on terms of the patient, but also what providers can actually deliver it. They need to figure out, whether there's medical eligibility, whether there's provider eligibility to deliver something. And for long-acting, we're clearly going to need providers who deliver this, unfortunately. It's the only downside of it, really. The demand needs to be created. They need to cost it. They need to find and source an order. Obviously, we offer a service for that, and it needs to be procured. The workforce needs to be activated to be able to deliver it. They need to be trained, and whatever supervision systems need to be in place. Local distribution needs to be worked out. The M&E systems need to be worked out. And all of those things, as you can imagine, take an awfully long time, much longer than we would like. And I think that's why we see such disappointing progress. We at the Global Fund were really, really hoping we were going to see much greater demand for PrEP. And we've just done a deep dive into the 9 countries which make up sort of 70% of our investments and 70% of our results. And just looking at PrEP, unmet need for PrEP, so, which, as everybody knows, we did so abysmally with in up to our 2020 targets. We had a paltry target of 3 million, to which we got to about 700,000, estimated to be about 10% of the unmet need being met. So, and I think that's why we see such disappointing progress. We at the Global Fund were really, really hoping we were going to see much greater demand for PrEP. And we've just done a deep dive into the 9 countries which make up sort of 70% of our investments and 70% of our results. And just looking at PrEP, unmet need for PrEP, so, which, as everybody knows, we did so abysmally with in up to our 2020 targets. We had a paltry target of 3 million, to which we got to about 700,000, estimated to be about 10% of the unmet need being met. So I absolutely welcome these new technologies, but we need a lot of help to actually get to the place where it will translate to being a service offered to the people that need it. And there are so many hurdles in the way that unless we come together, unless we have community voices, unless we have very proactive moves in country to really try and accelerate this process, we will still be talking about this in an ACASA 3 years' time, and we'll be looking at lamentable progress. And frankly, we don't have time. These people don't have time. As Quarraisha said, these girls, it is almost criminal to my mind that we have, we have an almost 100% effective PrEP regimen. We have various other options. We haven't even made the basic one available yet. And I just struggle to understand why that we find ourselves in this situation and why we can't more systematic. One of the things to come back to Kumarasamy's point about why research is so important, that this is all much quicker and much better in a place where the research has occurred, because there's a priming of the communities involved, a priming of the beneficiaries, and a priming of the whole sort of system around which you need to build this to the need for it. The success of the research is obviously usually welcomed. So getting all these pieces to line up to translate to it being a formal part of a national program is such a big lift. And so we really have to come together to do that. And we have to start doing that with the urgency it deserves. And as Kumarasamy said, pregnant women of reproductive age are always excluded from these research, so they're always the last. Dolutegravir transition hasn't happened yet. We don't have gender parity in dolutegravir transition, introducing a potent, sensible, easy to take, cheaper option for treatment as is. So my fear about our long actings is if we don't be very, very, very intentional, we will not see the uptake that these things will deserve. So let me stop there because I know we're short of time.
Thank you so much. And we're thankful for all the panelists that have been with us today. It's been a really interesting discussion. We just have a couple of minutes.
Cherise, if you don't mind, if nobody has questions, I would like to have the speakers' insight on what they would think would be the most promising tools for the next coming years.
Would like to
I'm
go
happy
first.
to go first. That is in the PrEP landscape for HIV prevention. We have the monthly rings. We shouldn't forget we have the daily pills, we have the monthly rings, and we have the 2 monthly injectables. And I think the big challenge with the ring and with the monthly injectables is getting regulatory approvals in the countries where they're going to be made available, because that always precedes policy. And then, as Siobhan highlighted, that there's a long gap between policy and practice and programming. And I think I highlighted some of the issues around uptake, which relate to perception of risk. So when we think about it, and then when we think about it in the context of MPTs, which is also looking at the STIs and looking at the contraceptives, we have a whole array of fertility control options. But that it's not going to be a silver bullet, long acting. There are options, and the more options and choices we give, the more likely we have to have uptake. And it is about not one size fitting all is one point. And then the second is about perception of risk. And how do we do that? And then thirdly, getting providers to amplify what we know. So I think those are key elements to success. Thank you.
Thank you, Quarraisha. So now, yes, Sandra, if you would like to make your concluding remarks.
Absolutely. And I think, as you can see, this is a topic that could keep us here forever, because there's lots to be said, there's lots to be done, there's lots of thinking around, and that's why I think it's my honor to close this enriching debate and discussion. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And I think I would close with 2 notes. One note of urgency and another note of hope. And why urgency? And I think it's just taking each and every of the speakers of this panelist and understanding that there's lots of gaps to be filled in. There's gaps in terms of funding and investment. It's a huge gap. We have to make sure that we understand and include early enough in the development of LA products the end user preferences, because we are trying to understand, but they're not yet really included in the development of these products early enough. We have to understand in parallel with the development, which is the manufacturing landscape. Is it a product that is easy to manufacture, the complexity, the cost of goods associated, the distribution, how it will be done? So this should be all done in parallel. And of course, the one that you've been talking in all your talks is the demand creation. This demand creation is definitely critical, and we have to work around it soon enough, once again, with education and other tools that we know generate demand creation. But all is not bad, and this is why I have, so this is urgent, but I think there's a note of hope. And the note of hope is that we are all here, we are together, we're working hard, we are committed, and the LA community, so LA community, not meaning Los Angeles, but long-acting community is really being strengthened. And this is for me a sign of hope that things will go faster and of course well, and the things will happen. So let's keep working, let's keep going, let's going together. I think we have a beautiful journey ahead of us, and glad to be part of this group of people that is taking this forward. So thank you very much all, and my pleasure to close this.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.